After buying new shoes. A lady grabbed my hand. "Are you the man who took my son?" I didn't take anyone. I pulled away from her grip, confused. She was maybe 40 with wild eyes and tangled hair, and she kept staring at my feet like they held the secrets of the universe. "No, those are my son's shoes. You took him and are wearing his shoes." She pointed at my new Jordans with a shaking finger. "They can't be. I just bought these on Facebook Marketplace." I took a step back. The shoes were practically brand new when I got them. Some guy named Gordon had posted them for half the retail price, saying his kid had outgrown them. I'd driven 20 minutes to meet him in a parking lot and paid cash. Normal Facebook Marketplace stuff. The woman started crying but kept her eyes locked on the shoes. She asked to see them closer and reached out like she wanted to touch them. I felt bad for her obvious distress, even though she was accusing me of something horrible. Maybe her son had similar shoes, and she was confused in her grief. I sat on a nearby bench and untied the shoes. The woman watched every movement like a hawk. When I handed them to her, she snatched them and took off running. No warning. Just grabbed them and bolted down the street. "Hey!" I jumped up and chased after her in my socks. She was faster than she looked. We ran past confused pedestrians and through a red light. Cars honked as I dodged traffic trying to keep up. My socks were getting destroyed on the pavement, but those shoes cost me $200. The woman reached a beat-up Honda and dove inside. I was close enough to see her fumbling with the keys. Her hands were shaking so bad she dropped them twice. I almost caught up, but she got the engine started and peeled out. I ran to my own car, parked down the block, and followed her. While driving, I tried calling Gordon from the Marketplace listing. The phone rang once, then went straight to a disconnected message. I tried again with the same result. The number was dead. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Something was definitely wrong here. Normal people don't sell shoes, then immediately disconnect their phones. The woman's panic seemed more justified now. I kept following her Honda through suburban streets. She was driving erratically, but with purpose, taking specific turns like she knew exactly where she was going. After 10 minutes, I realized we were heading toward the police station downtown. She pulled into the lot and parked crooked across 2 spaces. I followed her inside, still in my destroyed socks. She was already at the front desk, clutching the shoes and yelling for someone named Daniel. The desk sergeant looked concerned and made a phone call. Within seconds, a uniformed officer came running from the back. "That woman stole my shoes!" I pointed at the woman, but she was already showing the shoes to the officer. "Babe, look! These are Darren's!" The officer's face went white. He took the shoes with trembling hands and examined them closely, turned them over, checked inside. His breathing got faster with each second. "Our son has been missing for 4 years. His voice cracked as he looked at me. "Where did you buy these?" 4 years. Their kid had been gone for 4 years, and somehow his shoes ended up on Facebook Marketplace. I told them everything I knew. Gordon's listing, the parking lot meetup, how he'd said his kid outgrew them, the disconnected phone number. The officer was already on his radio calling for backup and told me, "Come on, you're riding with me. We're tracking down this guy." Officer Daniel grabbed his jacket from a hook behind the desk and pulled his keys from his pocket while barking orders into his radio about backup units meeting us at Gordon's address from the Facebook profile. I followed him through the station's back hallway toward the parking lot, my destroyed socks squishing against the cold tile floor with every step. He pointed at a patrol car and told me to get in the passenger seat while he threw his jacket in the back. The engine roared to life, and we were speeding out of the lot before I even managed to click my seatbelt into place. My hands were shaking as I gripped the door handle. Officer Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel while using his other to work the radio, calling in Gordon's description and the address from his Marketplace profile. He asked me rapid questions about Gordon without taking his eyes off the road. What did he look like exactly? I tried to remember every detail from our quick parking lot meeting. Medium height, maybe 5'10", brown hair that needed a cut, wore a blue baseball cap and sunglasses even though it was cloudy. What kind of car did he drive? A silver sedan? Maybe a Toyota or Honda? I couldn't remember the exact model, but it had a dent in the rear bumper. What exactly did he say about the shoes? He said his kid had outgrown them after only wearing them twice, that kids grow so fast these days. Officer Daniel relayed every detail through the radio, while his knuckles turned white from gripping the steering wheel. Other units confirmed they were heading to the address. We took a hard right that threw me against the door, then accelerated down a main street toward the older part of town. Buildings got more rundown as we drove, paint peeling off storefronts and trash collecting in gutters. After about 10 minutes of weaving through traffic with the sirens blaring, we pulled up to a shabby apartment complex with 3 other patrol cars already positioned at different corners of the building. Officers were spreading out to cover the exits, moving quick but careful. Officer Daniel turned to me and said to stay in the car no matter what happened, then joined the other officers at the main entrance. I watched through the windshield as they approached the building, checking mailboxes for apartment 2B where Gordon's profile said he lived. 4 officers went up the exterior stairs while 2 stayed at the bottom. They knocked hard on the door of 2B, announcing themselves as police and asking Gordon to open up. No answer came from inside. They knocked again, louder this time, saying they needed to speak with him about an urgent matter. Still nothing. One officer put his ear to the door and shook his head at the others. After several more attempts with no response, an older man in a stained tank top came out from the apartment next door, and I could see him talking to the officers, though I couldn't hear what he was saying. The man disappeared back inside and returned with a younger guy in khakis and a polo shirt who pulled out a massive ring of keys. Must be the building manager. He flipped through the keys while the officers waited, hands on their weapons but not drawn. The manager found the right key and stepped back as the officers positioned themselves. They pushed the door open slowly, announcing themselves again as they entered. I held my breath watching the empty doorway, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Finally, Officer Daniel came back out and walked to the car, his face tight with frustration. He got in and slammed his hand on the dashboard. The apartment was empty except for some old furniture that looked like it came with the place. The manager said Gordon had moved out 2 weeks ago, paid his last month's rent in cash, and left no forwarding address. This guy had been planning his exit. We drove back to the station in silence except for Officer Daniel updating dispatch that the suspect wasn't at the listed address. Back at the station, an older detective in a wrinkled suit was waiting for us in the lobby. Detective Tom Gallegos, he introduced himself, explaining he'd be taking over the case since Officer Daniel had personal involvement and couldn't officially lead the investigation. Gallegos had gray hair and moved like someone who'd been doing this job for decades. He led me to an interview room and asked me to go through everything again from the very beginning while he set up a digital recorder on the table between us. I told him about seeing Gordon's marketplace listing, the photos of the shoes, how the price was too good to pass up. Gallegos took notes on a yellow legal pad while I talked, occasionally asking for more details. How long was the listing up before I contacted him? Maybe 3 days. Did Gordon suggest the meeting location, or did I? He did. Said the parking lot was convenient for him. Did anyone else respond to the listing that I knew of? The post showed other people had viewed it, but I was the first to message him. After going through everything twice more, I gave Gallegos access to my Facebook account so he could see the messages between me and Gordon. He called in someone from their tech team, a young woman with glasses who immediately started working on her laptop. Within an hour, she looked up from her screen with a frown. Gordon's account was fake, created just 3 months ago with minimal activity except for marketplace listings. She scrolled through his selling history, and every single item was kids' stuff like toys, clothes, bikes, and shoes. The forensics tech arrived to collect the Jordans, which Officer Daniel's wife had been clutching in the lobby. The tech wore gloves and carefully placed the shoes in evidence bags, explaining they'd test for DNA, fingerprints, and any other trace evidence. She said results would normally take a week, but given the circumstances, they'd put a rush on it and should have something in 48 hours. Officer Daniel paced the hallway outside the interview room, checking his phone every few seconds and running his hands through his hair. Gallegos got on the phone with someone at Facebook's legal department, and after some back and forth about the urgency of the situation, a judge signed a warrant for them to release Gordon's IP addresses and any payment information on file. The company cooperated quickly once they understood it involved a missing child, and data started flowing in by evening. The tech team discovered Gordon had been careful, always using public Wi-Fi at coffee shops and libraries to access his account, never from a home connection. But he'd used the same coffee shop downtown multiple times, and Gallegos immediately requested their security footage. The coffee shop manager emailed the files within an hour, and we all crowded around the computer screen as the tech scrolled through days of footage. There he was, same blue cap and sunglasses, hunched over a laptop in the corner booth. The footage was clear enough to see his face when he lifted his cup to drink. Thin features, nervous habit of checking over his shoulder every few minutes, looked about 35 years old. Gallegos had the image printed and distributed to every patrol unit in the city with orders to approach with caution. The clock on the wall showed 9:30, and I suddenly remembered I was supposed to be at work 2 hours ago. I grabbed my phone and called my boss while Gallegos kept working at his computer. She picked up on the third ring, sounding worried since I never missed work without calling. I told her I was at the police station helping with something important, but couldn't give details yet. She asked if I was okay and when I might be back. I said I didn't know, but it was serious, and she said to take whatever time I needed. The curiosity in her voice was obvious, but she didn't push for more information. My normal Tuesday morning of spreadsheets and meetings felt like a different world from this police station chaos. 20 minutes later, the lobby doors burst open and a woman rushed in looking frantic. She went straight to Officer Daniel and threw her arms around him. This had to be his wife, the woman who'd chased me for the shoes earlier. She was crying into his chest while he held her tight. When she finally pulled back, she saw me sitting there and walked over. Her face was red and puffy from crying, but she grabbed my hands. She thanked me over and over for not just walking away when she acted crazy in the street. She kept saying those shoes meant Darren might still be alive somewhere. Officer Daniel put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there together looking broken but hopeful. Gallegos called us over to his computer where he'd pulled up traffic camera footage from the parking lot where I'd met Gordon. The quality wasn't great, but you could see Gordon's car clearly. He zoomed in on the license plate and ran it through the system. The plate came back as belonging to a stolen vehicle reported missing 6 months ago from 2 states over. This guy had really planned ahead, using a stolen car for his marketplace meetups. The hours kept passing and my stomach was growling since I hadn't eaten since breakfast. By midnight, I was exhausted and kept yawning, but Gallegos said they might need me to identify Gordon if they found him. Officer Daniel noticed me struggling to stay awake and went to the vending machines down the hall. He came back with 2 coffees and sandwiches from the machine. The sandwich was one of those plastic-wrapped ones that taste like cardboard, but I was too hungry to care. Officer Daniel took a few bites of his, but mostly just stared at it. Neither of us had much appetite with everything going on. Around 1 in the morning, Gallegos' phone rang and he answered quickly. A patrol unit had spotted the stolen car abandoned behind a grocery store on the other side of town. Gallegos grabbed his jacket and called for a forensics team to meet him there. I stayed at the station with Officer Daniel while they went to process the scene. We sat in the break room drinking terrible coffee and waiting for news. 40 minutes later, Gallegos called with an update. The car had fast food wrappers all over the floor, and they'd found a receipt from a hardware store dated yesterday. The receipt was for rope, tarps, and bleach, which made my skin crawl thinking about why someone would need those things together. Gallegos said he was heading to the hardware store to check their security footage. Another hour passed before he called again. The store's cameras had caught Gordon clearly, showing him buying the items and paying cash. Gallegos' voice sounded dark when he described watching Gordon calmly purchasing what looked like supplies for something terrible. The footage showed Gordon still wearing that same blue cap and checking over his shoulder constantly. He looked nervous but determined, like someone following through on a plan. Gallegos said he was coming back to the station with copies of everything. By 3 in the morning, a woman in a sharp suit arrived at the station. Gallegos introduced her as Assistant District Attorney Mariah Thornton. She had that look of someone who'd been woken up but was fully alert anyway. She sat down with Gallegos and started asking pointed questions about probable cause and what evidence we had for search warrants. She reviewed everything quickly, flipping through papers and watching the footage on Gallegos' laptop. After 20 minutes, she approved expanded resources for the search. She said this had enough red flags to justify bringing in more units and even getting help from neighboring counties. While Thornton made phone calls, Gallegos went back to Gordon's Facebook profile looking for any connections. The account only had one friend who'd messaged him regularly over the past month. Gallegos tracked down her phone number and called even though it was the middle of the night. The woman was confused at first but remembered Gordon because she'd bought a tricycle from him for her grandson. She said he'd seemed nice enough, but mentioned he had to get back to his place near the old industrial district. That narrowed down the search area significantly, since the industrial district only covered about 10 square blocks. Gallegos immediately got on the radio coordinating teams to start searching abandoned warehouses in that area. There were dozens of old buildings to check, and it would take time to search them all safely. Officer Daniel stood up when he heard the teams mobilizing, but Gallegos shook his head. He couldn't let Officer Daniel join the search since he was too personally involved. Officer Daniel's face went red, and he looked ready to argue, but his wife grabbed his arm. She reminded him that the other officers would do everything possible to find Gordon. Officer Daniel sat back down hard in his chair, his hands clenched into fists. The waiting was clearly killing him, but he had to follow protocol. I'd been sitting there for hours trying to remember every detail of my meeting with Gordon. Something kept nagging at me about our transaction, but I couldn't figure out what. Then suddenly it hit me like a punch to the gut. Gordon had a bandage wrapped around his left hand when we met. When I'd asked about it, he'd said he'd scraped it in his workshop while fixing something. He'd specifically used the word workshop, not garage or basement or shed. I immediately told Gallegos about the workshop comment, and his eyes lit up. He grabbed his radio and started barking orders about checking warehouses with active power in the industrial district. Within minutes, he had 3 teams ready to go, and they narrowed it down to only 3 buildings that still had electricity hookups. The teams would hit all 3 at the same time, so Gordon couldn't get warned and run. Gallegos told me to stay put while they searched, but I could watch the body cam feeds from the conference room monitors. The first warehouse came up empty, except for some old machinery and rat droppings everywhere. The second warehouse feed showed something different, though. The officers found a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner and an old camp stove with empty food cans stacked next to it. Someone had definitely been living there recently. The sleeping bag was still warm when they touched it, and fresh coffee grounds sat in a paper filter on a makeshift table made from plywood and cinder blocks. They'd missed Gordon by maybe an hour or 2 at most. The officers bagged everything for evidence while Gallegos cursed under his breath about being so close. My phone started ringing, and it was the forensics tech calling from the lab. She had the preliminary DNA results from the shoes and wanted to talk to Gallegos, but I told her he was in the field. She said it couldn't wait, so she told me instead. They'd found 2 different DNA profiles on the shoes, and one matched the saliva sample Officer Daniel and his wife had provided years ago when Darren first went missing. These were definitely Darren's shoes. My stomach dropped hearing it confirmed like that. The tech said she'd already sent the official report to Gallegos' email, but wanted someone to know right away. I thanked her and hung up feeling sick. Those shoes on my feet had belonged to a missing kid, and Gordon had sold them to me like it was nothing. Gallegos came back looking frustrated until I told him about the DNA results. His whole face changed, and he immediately went to tell Officer Daniel, who was still waiting in the break room with his wife. I watched them through the glass as Gallegos delivered the news. Officer Daniel's wife started sobbing while he just sat there frozen. The confirmation made it real in a way that hope couldn't. Their son's shoes were here, which meant he'd been close at some point. Gallegos' phone rang and he answered it while walking back to his desk. A business near the warehouse had security cameras, and they'd caught something interesting this morning. Gallegos pulled up the footage on his computer, and we watched Gordon loading cardboard boxes into a white van around 6 in the morning. The timestamp showed it was only 4 hours ago. Gordon looked rushed and kept checking over his shoulder while he loaded the van. The camera caught a clear shot of the license plate, and Gallegos immediately ran it through the system. The van belonged to a rental company downtown. Gallegos called them and got transferred 3 times before reaching someone who could help. The manager pulled up the rental agreement and said Gordon had used a different name to rent it, but the physical description matched. The good news was all their vehicles had GPS trackers for insurance purposes. The manager logged into their tracking system while we waited on the phone. After a few minutes of typing, he said he had the location, and the van was currently heading north on Interstate 85, doing about 70 miles per hour. Gallegos thanked him and immediately called dispatch to alert the state police. Within minutes, they had units heading to intercept and set up roadblocks ahead of Gordon's position. Gallegos put his phone on speaker, so Officer Daniel could hear the updates coming in from the field. The 1st State Police unit spotted the van and confirmed it matched the description. They stayed back to avoid spooking Gordon, while more units got into position ahead. The roadblock went up at mile marker 42, and traffic started backing up immediately. We watched the GPS dot on Gallegos' screen getting closer to the roadblock. Then suddenly the dot veered off the highway at the last exit before the roadblock. Gordon must have seen the police cars or the traffic backing up. The GPS showed him taking rural roads now, and his speed dropped to 40 miles per hour. He was heading into farm country, where there were fewer cameras and lots of places to hide. The search area just got way bigger and harder to cover. State police units scrambled to follow while Gallegos coordinated with the local sheriff's department. They knew those back roads better than anyone and could help cut off escape routes. The GPS kept updating every 30 seconds, showing Gordon taking seemingly random turns through the countryside. About 20 minutes later, Gallegos' phone rang with a 911 dispatcher on the line. A farmer had just called in about a white van matching the description parked behind his barn. The farmer said he'd gone out to check on his cows and saw the van sitting there with nobody around it. Units started converging on the farm from all directions, while Gallegos told me to prepare myself. They might find Darren there, but after 4 years it might not be good news. I felt my hands shaking as we watched the body cam feeds come online. The first officers approached the barn carefully with weapons drawn. They could see Gordon near a metal drum with smoke coming out of it. He was burning papers and throwing more documents into the fire. The officers yelled for him to stop and put his hands up. Gordon looked at them for a second, then just dropped the papers he was holding and put his hands on his head. No fight at all. He looked almost relieved as they cuffed him and pulled him away from the burning drum. Other officers grabbed a fire extinguisher from their car and put out the fire to save whatever documents were left. The partially burned papers looked like records or lists of some kind. While they secured Gordon in a patrol car, the other officers searched the van. The body cam showed them opening the back doors, and I heard several officers gasp at what they found inside. Boxes of children's clothing all sorted by size, toys still in packages, school backpacks with name tags ripped off, and worst of all was a manila folder full of photographs. The officer wearing the camera flipped through them, and I saw at least 5 different kids, including one that looked like it could be Darren from the old missing posters. Gallegos' face went dark as he processed what this meant. This wasn't just about one missing kid anymore. The station got busy fast with officers running in and out, while Gordon sat in the interrogation room not saying a word. He just stared at the wall with his arms crossed and wouldn't even look at Gallegos when he tried asking questions. After about 20 minutes, Gordon finally said he wanted a lawyer, and then went completely silent again. The court had to send someone, and it took almost 2 hours before this tired-looking public defender showed up carrying a stack of folders. She looked like she'd been working all night, and her eyes went wide when Gallegos explained what Gordon was accused of. While they waited for the lawyer to talk to Gordon, other officers were already back at the barn searching everything. Gallegos kept getting updates on his phone, and each one made his face look worse. They'd found a hidden door in the barn floor covered by hay bales that led down to some kind of storm cellar. The officers going down there had to use flashlights because there was no electricity, but what they found made them call for the forensics team immediately. The cellar had been turned into a living space with 3 small beds pushed against the walls and a chemical toilet in the corner. The worst part was the door only had locks on the outside, which meant whoever stayed down there couldn't get out on their own. My skin felt like bugs were crawling on it just thinking about kids being kept in that dark hole. The forensics team spent hours down there collecting DNA samples from the beds and walls, while Gallegos started going through those photos from the van more carefully. He had missing children reports spread across 3 desks and was comparing faces one by one. Within an hour, he'd matched 3 kids from the photos to reports from other counties going back 2 years. Each match made him pick up his phone to call another police department, and soon we had officers from 3 different towns heading our way. Officer Daniel had been pacing the hallway, but when Gallegos told him about the cellar, he just stopped walking and stared at nothing. His wife grabbed his arm as his whole body started shaking, and he had to sit down on a bench. She held him while he put his head in his hands, and I could see his shoulders moving like he was crying, but trying not to make noise. The waiting was killing all of us, but it was destroying them knowing their son might have been kept in that cellar. About an hour later, Gallegos got another call that made him grab his jacket and head for the door. The search team had found disturbed dirt behind the barn that looked like something had been buried and dug up multiple times. My heart dropped into my stomach thinking about what that might mean. They were bringing in special equipment, including ground radar and dogs trained to find bodies. Officer Daniel heard what was happening and jumped up trying to follow, but two other officers had to physically hold him back. His wife was crying and begging him to stay with her instead of going to see whatever they might find. The next 2 hours felt like days while we waited for news from the barn. Gallegos kept his phone on speaker so we could all hear the updates as they came in. First, the dogs walked all around the disturbed ground but didn't alert, which meant they didn't smell any bodies. Everyone in the room let out a breath they'd been holding. Then the radar showed metal containers buried about 3 feet down in neat rows. The team started digging carefully to preserve any evidence and pulled up the first container after about 30 minutes. It was a metal toolbox with a padlock that they had to cut off. Inside were children's clothes, all folded neatly with a paper on top that had initials and a date from 3 years ago. They kept digging and found more containers, each one with different initials and dates. The 7th container had DM and a date from 4 years ago. Officer Daniel knew those were his son's initials before anyone said it out loud. When they opened it, they found Darren's jacket that his parents had described in the missing person report, and his school backpack with his name still written on it in marker. His mom grabbed the phone from Gallegos and begged them to look for anything else, but that was all that was in that container. By the time they finished digging, they'd found 14 containers total with belongings from different kids. Back at the station, Gordon's lawyer finally came out of the interrogation room looking sick. She walked straight to Mariah Thornton, who'd shown up to handle the prosecution, and they went into a conference room. Through the glass door, we could see them talking with lots of hand gestures. After about 10 minutes, Thornton came out and told Gallegos that Gordon wanted to make a deal. He'd tell them where the children were in exchange for life in prison instead of the death penalty. Thornton said the state needed proof that at least one child was still alive before they'd consider any deal. The lawyer went back to Gordon while Thornton started making calls to her boss. While this was happening, the news had already picked up the story, and the parking lot was filling up with reporters. One of them must have gotten Gordon's name because suddenly, Gallegos' phone rang with a man saying he'd seen Gordon on TV. Eric Frazier said he'd been Gordon's landlord 2 years ago, and Gordon had rented a storage unit from him too. He always paid in cash and acted really weird about anyone going near the storage area. Frazier gave Gallegos the address of the storage place across town. 3 patrol cars headed over there immediately, while Gallegos called ahead to the storage facility. The manager, Sloane McCallum, met the officers at the gate with her master keys, and her hands were shaking, so bad she could barely hold them. She led them to Unit 47 and had to try 3 times before she got the key in the lock. When the door rolled up, everyone stepped back not knowing what they'd find. The unit was full of filing cabinets and cardboard boxes all labeled with years. The officers put on gloves and opened the nearest box, which was full of notebooks. Gordon had been keeping detailed records of everything, including names, dates, and most importantly, buyer information for whoever he'd been selling to. The officers started pulling notebooks out and flipping through pages, while Gallegos put on reading glasses and grabbed the first one. His face changed as he read, and he called another officer over to look at something on the page. They were both silent for a minute. Then Gallegos turned to face us with the notebook still in his hand. He said Gordon hadn't killed any kids based on what he was reading. The notebook had columns with dates and initials and dollar amounts next to each one. Officer Daniel pushed past everyone to see for himself and grabbed the notebook from Gallegos. His eyes moved across the pages, getting wider with each line he read. The amounts ranged from $20,000 to $50,000 per entry. His wife asked what it meant, and Officer Daniel dropped the notebook and ran outside. We heard him throwing up in the parking lot while his wife started screaming and crying at the same time. Gallegos picked up the notebook and kept reading while other officers opened more boxes. Each box had similar records showing transactions going back 6 years. The storage unit had become a crime scene with officers taking photos of everything before bagging it as evidence. Within an hour, 3 black SUVs pulled up and FBI agents in suits walked into the storage facility. The lead agent showed his badge to Gallegos and said they were taking over since this involved interstate trafficking. They were polite but firm about everyone stepping back while they processed the scene. One agent sat with Officer Daniel and his wife, explaining that the FBI had massive resources for cases like this. They would track every lead and follow every dollar until they found these kids. The hope mixed with dread on their faces was hard to watch. The FBI tech team arrived with laptops and started entering Gordon's coded records into their system. The codes were basic substitutions that took them about an hour to crack. Once decoded, the records showed bank account numbers where Gordon deposited money after each transaction. The agents cross-referenced the deposits with surveillance footage from banks and ATMs. They found Gordon making cash deposits always under $10,000 to avoid reporting requirements. The money trail led to couples across the country who'd wired funds to Gordon over the years. Some transactions included notes about adoption paperwork and home studies. The FBI realized some buyers might have thought they were adopting legally through private channels. Around midnight, an agent got excited looking at his screen and called his supervisor over. They'd matched a Michigan couple to a wire transfer from 4 years ago that lined up with Darren's disappearance. The couple had a son the right age according to the school enrollment records they pulled. The agent showed Officer Daniel a photo from the couple's social media of a boy at a birthday party. Officer Daniel's legs gave out, and his wife had to catch him. It looked like Darren, but older and with different hair. The FBI mobilized a team in Michigan to approach the couple carefully, since they might not know the child was kidnapped. Officer Daniel and his wife wanted to leave immediately, but the agent said they needed to do this right to avoid spooking anyone. They booked flights for the next morning and assigned 2 agents to accompany the parents. I stayed at the station to help with the investigation since I was the one who'd bought the shoes that started everything. The FBI had me go through every detail of my interaction with Gordon again while they built their case. Over the next few days, I watched the news from the station as the story exploded nationally. The FBI located 3 more children within 48 hours using Gordon's records. Each recovery was on every channel with footage of parents crying and hugging kids who didn't remember them. Some reunions went smoothly, but others were complicated. One child had been with a family for 5 years and thought they were his real parents. Another was found with a couple who'd been told the birth mother was a drug addict who'd abandoned the baby. The legal battles were starting as couples who'd raised these kids for years fought to keep them. Child services got involved in every case to determine what was best for each child. Back at the station, Gordon's lawyer kept trying to make deals while Gordon sat in federal custody. The FBI wasn't interested in deals until they'd recovered every child in his records. The pressure finally broke Gordon after a week when he realized he was facing life in federal prison. He admitted to taking 12 children over 6 years and selling them to couples desperate for kids. He gave up names and contact information for everyone he'd worked with. His network included people who forged adoption papers and a doctor who provided fake medical records. Gordon claimed the buyers would have him killed if he talked, but he was more scared of life in prison. The FBI put him in protective custody while they rounded up his associates. 3 days after they'd flown to Michigan, Officer Daniel called me from a hotel room. The DNA test confirmed the boy was Darren, but he had no memory of his real parents. He was scared and confused and kept asking for his mom and dad, meaning the couple who'd raised him. The couple was cooperating with authorities and seemed genuinely devastated. They'd paid $30,000 for what they thought was a legal private adoption. They had paperwork that looked real, and had even met with someone posing as a social worker. The FBI found similar stories with other couples who'd been scammed into thinking they were saving unwanted children. The child psychologists worked with Darren for 5 days before attempting any reunification. They had to go slow since forcing it could cause trauma that would last forever. He was healthy, and had been well cared for, and even loved by the only parents he remembered. The psychologist said it would take months or maybe years for him to adjust to the truth. The complexity of undoing 4 years of lies was crushing everyone involved. 2 weeks later, I got called to testify before a federal grand jury about buying the shoes from Gordon. I sat in a room full of people in suits and told my story one more time. The prosecutor said my decision to chase after those shoes had saved 12 children's lives. Without that Facebook Marketplace purchase, none of these kids would have been found. It felt strange being called a hero for buying shoes and chasing a crying woman through traffic, but that's how it worked out. The next morning, my phone started blowing up with texts and calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Someone at the courthouse had leaked my name to the press, and now every reporter in the state wanted an exclusive interview about how I'd accidentally exposed a child trafficking ring by buying shoes. I looked out my apartment window and saw 3 news vans parked on the street with camera crews setting up on the sidewalk. My landlord called 20 minutes later saying reporters were buzzing every apartment trying to find which unit was mine. I packed a bag and called my buddy Jake, who lived across town, and asked if I could crash at his place for a few days. The reporters followed my car for 6 blocks before I lost them at a red light. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed off social media and avoided my usual spots while the story dominated the news cycle. 3 weeks after the grand jury testimony, Officer Daniel called to tell me they were bringing Darren home that day. The psychologists had worked with him every day to prepare him for the transition, and now they felt ready to attempt reunification with his real parents. Officer Daniel had taken leave from the force to be there full-time, while therapists came to the house twice a day to help the whole family adjust. He said the reunion was beautiful, but way harder than they'd expected since Darren still didn't remember them and kept asking for the people who'd raised him for 4 years. The kid was confused and scared, but physically healthy, which was more than some families got. Over the next month, the FBI kept dismantling Gordon's network, and more kids started coming home. Every rescue made the national news, and I'd sit in Jake's living room watching coverage and recognizing stuff from Gordon's Marketplace page. That tricycle one family talked about, the little pink backpack another mom held up, the baseball glove a dad was crying over. All those innocent-looking sales had been connected to stolen kids, and Gordon had been running his operation right out in the open on Facebook. The prosecutors moved fast once they had all the evidence, and Gordon's lawyer convinced him to plead guilty to avoid trial and a possible death penalty. At the sentencing hearing 2 months later, parents gave impact statements while Gordon stared at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Officer Daniel spoke about the 4 years of not knowing if his son was alive or dead, and how that uncertainty had almost destroyed his marriage and his sanity. The judge gave Gordon life without parole and had to bang his gavel 3 times to quiet the courtroom when people started cheering. Over the next 6 months, trials wrapped up for all the buyers and accomplices Gordon had given up. Some couples genuinely didn't know they were buying kidnapped children and had paperwork that looked completely legal, while others clearly knew something was wrong, but didn't care as long as they got a kid. The legal system had to sort through each case individually, while families tried to heal and figure out their new normal. I went back to my apartment once the media attention died down and tried to return to regular life, but stayed in touch with Officer Daniel's family through text messages and occasional phone calls. Darren was adjusting slowly and starting to remember little pieces of his early childhood, though the therapist said recovery wouldn't be linear and there would be good days and bad days for years to come. Facebook Marketplace added new verification requirements for anyone selling children's items after the case made them look bad for not having better safeguards in place. It was a small change that probably wouldn't prevent another Gordon, but at least they were trying something. I still checked seller profiles obsessively whenever I bought anything online, and probably always would after what happened. Officer Daniel went back to work 8 months after getting Darren back, but with a new focus on missing children cases since his experience made him invaluable to other families going through the same nightmare. He told me once that I'd given him his son back and he'd never forget that, even though all I did was buy some shoes and chase after them. A year after everything started, I got an invitation to Darren's birthday party and decided to go even though I felt weird about it. The kid was doing so much better than before, and actually laughed while playing with other kids in the backyard, though his parents mentioned he was still in therapy twice a week. Seeing him happy and safe and acting like a normal 8-year-old made everything we'd all gone through feel worth it, even though the road to get there had been brutal. The other rescued children had all kinds of different outcomes, with some thriving in their original homes, while others struggled with the transition and needed intensive therapy or even residential treatment. Support groups formed for the families to share resources and talk to people who understood what they were going through, since nobody else could really grasp what it was like to get your kid back after years of them being raised by strangers. The healing continued at different paces for everyone and would probably take years or maybe decades for some families to fully process what had happened to them. 3 weeks after the last trial wrapped up, my phone rang at 2 in the morning, and Officer Daniel's voice sounded strange when he told me Gordon was dead. The guards found him in his cell that morning after other inmates figured out what he'd done to all those kids. Word travels fast in prison, and child traffickers don't last long once everyone knows. Officer Daniel said he didn't know how to feel about it since part of him wanted Gordon to suffer for years, but another part was just glad it was over. I sat in my kitchen staring at the wall for an hour after we hung up, trying to process that the man who started all this was gone. The couple from Michigan who'd raised Darren for 4 years sent a letter to Officer Daniel's family around that same time, apologizing for everything, even though they claimed they didn't know. They were facing charges but cooperating with prosecutors, and their lawyer said they'd probably get probation since they had paperwork that looked real. The letter sat on Officer Daniel's desk at the station for months before he could bring himself to open it. When he finally did read it, he called me crying because they'd written about how much they loved Darren and how they'd tried to give him a good life. 2 years passed, and I'd see Officer Daniel's family at the grocery store or the park, and Darren looked like any other kid playing Little League and doing homework. The therapy was working, and he'd adjusted to calling them Mom and Dad again, though sometimes he'd get confused and use the other names. His parents found ways to work around those moments, and the therapist said it was normal for kids who'd been through what he had. The family had their routines now, with soccer practice on Tuesdays and family movie nights on Fridays, and from the outside, you'd never know what they'd been through. I started dating someone serious about 18 months after everything happened, and when we got engaged, Officer Daniel was one of the first people I called. The wedding was small, but his whole family came, and Darren was 8 by then, running around with the other kids at the reception. He didn't remember being taken anymore, and the therapist said that was probably for the best, since those memories wouldn't help him. Officer Daniel pulled me aside during the reception and thanked me again for buying those shoes and not letting it go when his wife ran off with them. The FBI released their final report, showing Gordon's ring had sold over 40 kids in the past decade, with most found but some still missing. The investigation would continue for years, but at least Gordon's part was done, and the main network was broken up. Some of those kids would never be found, and their families would always wonder, but at least 12 families got answers because of those shoes. Officer Daniel got promoted to detective after going back to work and specialized in missing children cases, using everything he'd learned from his own experience. In his first year as detective, he found 3 kids using techniques he'd developed during his son's case, like checking online marketplaces for kids' items. He told me once that the worst thing that ever happened to him became the thing that helped him save other families from the same pain. I kept all the Facebook messages from Gordon saved in a folder on my computer, as a reminder that bad people can hide behind normal transactions. Sometimes I'd look at them and think about how a simple shoe purchase changed so many lives and saved 12 kids from whatever Gordon had planned. Every time I buy something online now, I check the seller's profile and look for red flags, because you never know what's really happening. Life settled into a new normal, with Darren thriving in 3rd grade, and his parents finally able to sleep through the night without checking on him constantly. The other rescued kids had different outcomes, with some doing great and others still struggling, but all of them were alive and home. Sometimes I'd run into Officer Daniel at coffee shops or restaurants, and we'd talk about normal stuff like the weather or sports, but we both knew we shared something nobody else would understand. That 20-minute drive to buy shoes turned into the most important thing I ever did, even though I was just trying to get a good deal on Jordans. Looking back now, I'm glad I chased after those shoes when his wife took them, because if I'd just let her go, none of those kids would have been found. Well, that's gonna do it for now. Thanks for just being here and exploring all these curious details with me. Always enjoy sharing this time with you. Subscribe for more content like this.